By some miraculous luck, Kelvin was granted a ticket by the gods to be reborn into a new world. The goddess he met was an extraordinarily beautiful woman, but unfortunately, all memories of her would quickly disappear. This was because Kelvin had to trade all his memories from his previous life to gain skills in the new world. When he awoke, Kelvin was quite confused about where he was. Suddenly, a strange object appeared and informed him that he was one of the lucky winners who had been drawn to reincarnate into another world. Realizing he had chosen to trade all his memories from his previous life, he felt this was such a foolish decision. The object introduced this world as one where swords were used for combat and magic for flight. Currently, Kelvin had acquired the skills he had chosen before reincarnating here. His status screen showed that Kelvin primarily possessed support skills and excellent benefits when leveling up. Suddenly, Kelvin felt that everything here was good. Next, the status screen guided Kelvin to reach the nearest town to register as an adventurer. On the way, Kelvin was surprised that this object could speak normally. She introduced herself as Melina and informed him that he had begged her to become his subordinate. Therefore, Melina made Kelvin take responsibility, giving the young man a headache. As for how Melina could speak, it was due to the mental connection between a subordinate and their summoner. Kelvin guessed that he had logged out due to some error caused by Melina and another deity. Then, somehow he had fallen in love with Melina, meaning he could now only hear her voice. Melina revealed that Kelvin had chosen his skills and forced her to make a contract with him. Since Melina was also tired of her current job, she accepted Kelvin's proposal. While Melina kept rambling about this, Kelvin took the opportunity to admire his new appearance in the mirror. Learning that Melina viewed his reincarnation as a short-term trip, he immediately wanted her to return his memories. However, since he didn't have enough skill points and had already traded his memories, he had no say in the matter. The young man deeply regretted this decision because without his memories, he couldn't know how infatuated he had been with her. Melina continuously recounted Kelvin's sweet flirtations from the past, which had moved even her. Kelvin immediately froze up when his dark romantic history was exposed. More importantly, he really wanted to see what Melina looked like to have made him so devoted. Unfortunately, Kelvin currently didn't have enough mana to summon Melina. Therefore, she had to wait for him to mature and offer a fresher confession. But Kelvin declared that would never happen again. After talking for a while, they found the Adventurers Guild and went to register. Inside, it was very crowded as many people came to accept commissions and rewards. When it was Kelvin's turn to register, Ange handed him a form and offered to help him fill it out. But Kelvin declined because he possessed the language comprehension skill and had mastered everything since his reincarnation. Ange noticed Kelvin intended to write his profession as summoner and informed him this was an extremely rare profession, to the extent that a country might have only one or none at all. If Kelvin became widely known as a summoner, he would soon attract the attention of powerful figures. So Kelvin changed his profession to Heximage to enjoy his new life peacefully. A moment later, Ange brought out an F-class certificate and gave him a basic introduction to the job. The Adventurers Guild would receive commissions from various places, classify them by rank, and post notices on the board for adventurers. Currently, Kelvin could only accept F-class commissions or one level above. In case of failure, there would be a contract violation fee. So Kelvin couldn't arbitrarily choose high-rank commissions. If he completed 10 commissions in a row, Kelvin would be promoted to a higher adventurer rank, especially from C-class upward. There would be tests, so Ange reminded Kelvin to be careful. He needed to find commissions suitable for a novice, so she showed him some options. She suggested Kelvin start with a request to hunt green slimes and then try to make a contract with one. Because with beginner summoning magic, this was considered the most compatible monster. Kelvin also wanted to try this skill, so he immediately accepted this commission. Afterward, he bought a wooden staff containing a small amount of magical power to carry with him. On the way, Kelvin wondered if it was his luck, or if walking along the forest path had prevented him from encountering any monsters. Suddenly, Kelvin saw a group of green slimes, so Melina reminded him to use appraisal to read their information. Kelvin's appraisal was S-class, so if the opponent was a living being, he could appraise up to level 100, and for items, it was still S-class. Kelvin realized he couldn't appraise Melina's level, and was puzzled about how much mana he would need to summon her. The most important issue now was finding a way to make a contract with the slimes in front of him. Melina said all that was needed was their consent, and the rest depended on his will and ability. Since they couldn't understand his language, he just needed to weaken them by attacking. Then Kelvin just needed to initiate the contract to invite the slimes to become teammates, and they would surely agree. Using magic now would kill them instantly, so Kelvin had no choice but to fight them barehanded. Because he underestimated these slimes, Kelvin was hit repeatedly by them. Seeing their provocative appearance, Kelvin really wanted to use magic to deal with them beautifully. But once he did that, he would no longer be able to make a contract, so Kelvin could only endure the beatings from them. After calming down and analyzing the speed of the slimes, Kelvin finally gave one a knock with his staff that sent it rolling on the ground. Melina instructed Kelvin to make a contract by extending his palm forward. Kelvin immediately felt something leaving his body, and Melina explained it was due to using a large amount of magic power. From now on, the contract would consume half of his remaining mana whether successful or not. Fortunately, this slime agreed, so Melina congratulated him on successfully making a contract. Kelvin named the slime Clodo and hoped it would help him in the journey ahead. Thanks to the mental connection ability, Kelvin could sense that Clodo was very happy. At this point, Kelvin only had about 10 mana left, but still risked using summoning magic, and luckily Clodo still appeared. Melina told Kelvin he was cruel to make Clodo eliminate its own kind. Clodo immediately informed both of them that in the slime tribe, the strong absorbing the weak was normal. So Kelvin instructed Clodo to remove the cores of the slimes as proof of extermination, and it completely agreed. Afterward, Kelvin planned to use magic to attack one first and leave the rest to Clodo. He had also picked up some basic skills from Melina, so he could use hex magic. Although he only had a little mana left, his opponents were also slimes, so Kelvin believed he could handle them. When the time was right, they both rushed forward and defeated the slimes in no time. Kelvin noticed that Clodo's speed was faster than before making the contract. Melina explained that if enhanced by S-Class Summoning, all stats would be adjusted up to 100. Kelvin was even more surprised when witnessing the terrifying strength of his subordinate, transforming a slime into a powerful subordinate. No wonder summoners were so valued. Melina then clarified that currently, only Kelvin had S-Class Summoning magic. The rest would be C-Class or B-Class at most, so the enhancement value was usually 10 to 20. While Kelvin was thinking, Clodo beautifully defeated another slime, helping his master complete today's commission. After finishing the mission, Clodo returned to Kelvin's body to rest. With the money received, tonight Kelvin no longer had to worry about food and sleep. However, the young man still wanted more money to buy better equipment. Melina advised Kelvin not to be too greedy and boasted that she had thought of items that were affordable with his current funds. On the way to find an inn, Kelvin accidentally saw slaves being sold in a small alley. Suddenly, Kelvin had the idea to buy a girl to strengthen his team. Among them was a very beautiful elf who had attracted many people, including Kelvin. Seeing her pitiful state, he could only smile wryly and quietly leave. Wait until I save enough money, then I'll come back to rescue her, he thought. Soon, Kelvin also found the inn that Ange had recommended. For now, Kelvin would rent just for one night. Yet the landlady still welcomed him very cheerfully. Ange had introduced Kelvin as having very good cooking skills, which made the landlady laugh out loud. Coincidentally, she was also preparing dinner, so she would show off her skills and treat Kelvin to a meal. When receiving his room, Kelvin was a bit disappointed because there was no bathtub. Melina said only royal castles and mansions had those. While the young man was dreaming of living in a house equipped with a bathtub, his hungry stomach brought him back to reality. Just then, a delicious aroma wafted over, so Kelvin immediately went down to the kitchen to enjoy dinner. Melina also wanted to taste human food and begged Kelvin to quickly become stronger to summon her. Seeing the lavish table before him made Kelvin very happy and quickly forget all his fatigue. Currently, he had two teammates, Melina and Clodo, accompanying him on his path as a summoner. Although there were many difficulties ahead, Kelvin would still try to enjoy this new life. After some time accepting commissions from the guild, Kelvin and Clodo were both leveling up quickly, all thanks to double skill points and growth rate. He not only received many bonus stats, but also an additional 100 skill points. From the skill table, Kelvin had learned the D-class concealment skill. Being an ambitious man, Kelvin also wanted to increase it to B-class in the near future. Incidentally, Clodo was also quite impressive when it received the F-class absorption skill. As soon as she saw Kelvin again, Ange congratulated him on being promoted to E-class adventurer. When Kelvin accepted commissions higher than one rank without forming a team, Ange was very worried. In fact, Kelvin couldn't form a team because his identity as a summoner would be exposed immediately. However, he now had a reliable partner in Clodo, so that was no longer necessary. Ange knew Kelvin didn't want to attract attention, but his rapid promotion had caused some to suspect he was a dark mage who had made some mistake and switched to being an adventurer. Even Ange had some doubts, but Kelvin couldn't explain in detail. Ange apologized for interfering in Kelvin's affairs and advised him to be careful on his next commission. The young man told her not to worry because when he sensed danger, he would immediately flee. Ange also reminded Kelvin to equip more weapons to keep himself safe. As usual, he was asking Ange to choose a D-class commission for him when the blonde guy told him to choose hunting the Dark Knight. Ange was quite surprised that Casho returned earlier than usual. He was very arrogant and boasted about having just accepted a C-class commission. Knowing Kelvin had just been promoted to E-class, Casho immediately used a fake attitude to congratulate him. In response to Kelvin's curiosity, he introduced himself as a D-class adventurer. Everyone around knew Casho's real strength was B-class, but kept sarcastically commenting. Casho had a habit of showing off to newcomers and then suppressing them. People were wondering whether to tell Kelvin about Casho's true face, but immediately fell silent when they sensed the killing intent from him. Casho said his team was planning to hunt the Dark Knight and wanted to invite Kelvin to join. Ange immediately objected because she knew this Dark Knight was more dangerous than others. Casho advised Ange not to worry too much because his team would support him. However, Kelvin had declined, reasoning that he would not bring any benefit to them. He also tried to check and discovered that Casho's strength was not inferior to Clodo's. More importantly, his nickname was Demon Killer, so he would certainly not let Kelvin go. So he challenged them to a competition to see who would defeat the monster first. Casho reminded Kelvin that it was not something he could face alone, so he would still go with his team. Kelvin would have to go alone, but was still very confident, so Casho accepted this challenge. Kelvin guessed Casho would trap him while he was fighting the Dark Knight or after the battle ended. Since Casho's level was also worthy of being Kelvin's opponent, he wanted to test the results of his leveling up so far. Ange and her friends were all worried about Kelvin and hoped he would be safe. On the other side, Casho went to meet his subordinate to get information about Kelvin. Jinzu's appraisal revealed that Kelvin had a concealment skill above C-class. Hearing this, Casho was extremely curious about what Kelvin was hiding. Hot-tempered Dazzy didn't care about anything else and just wanted to beat Kelvin to a pulp. So Casho advised his friend to calm down because, as seniors, they needed to teach Kelvin in a gentle way. By late afternoon when they arrived at the evil castle, they discovered that the zombie monsters had already been eliminated. As soon as he saw Kelvin, he immediately guessed that he was a heximage. Jinzu, based on Kelvin's newly changed equipment, also saw through the abilities he was hiding. Kelvin informed them that going through that door would lead to the Dark Knight. Casho and Dazzy mocked Kelvin for not daring to deal with it before they arrived. Kelvin confidently said he would certainly win. But if the battle was interrupted by someone, it would be troublesome. He knew well that he was their target, so there was no need to pretend anymore and wanted both sides to fight right away. Casho thought Kelvin was hired by other adventurers or that he was after the bounty on Dazzy's group. Originally, Kelvin didn't know about this, yet they themselves revealed they had bounties on their heads. Kelvin immediately provoked the bald one, making him angry enough to charge forward and fall into the trap that he had set. Kelvin had used magic to transform the ground into a bottomless mud pit, making it impossible for Dazzy to move. This move of Kelvin's was so clever that even Casho and Jinzu didn't detect it. While Dazzy was trying to escape, Kelvin used a wind blade attack, causing Jinzu to run away in panic. Seeing this, Kelvin immediately summoned Clodo to block Jinzu's path. So with Clodo's pursuit, Jinzu was forced to return to the starting point. A few days earlier, while they were on a mission, Kelvin noticed Clodo showing unusual signs. The young man panicked, thinking it was injured, only to find that Clodo had evolved into a legendary monster class equivalent to a demon lord, something that had once driven the Tarazi Water Kingdom to the brink of extinction hundreds of years ago. Back to the present, the weak Jinzu had fainted after just one blow from Clodo. Taking advantage of Kelvin's momentary carelessness, Dazzy used his steel punch to escape from the mud pit and vowed to deal with Clodo to help his friend. But he had underestimated Clodo, and that had made him the second unfortunate victim. Currently, only Casho remained, but after just a few sword moves, he was beaten to a pulp. Instead of hunting monsters, this group had been hunting newcomers to gain experience points for the fastest promotion. For now, Kelvin would let these three debtors chill a bit before putting them in jail to serve their time, while he and Clodo would go deal with the remaining Dark Knight. As soon as he saw the opponent's strength, Kelvin wanted to recruit him as a teammate right away. So Kelvin introduced himself as a summoner and wanted to make a contract with him. Zedric never thought there would be a day when he could talk with Kelvin because until now, everyone who came here wanted to take his life. Zedric shared that in the past, he was human and had only recently become a monster. Zedric guessed the reason was that he still had regrets in this world. But what regrets, he couldn't remember. He even provocatively offered Kelvin candy. Zedric was surprised that Kelvin calmly ate it and laughed heartily when he saw the young man's grimacing expression. Kelvin angrily ordered Zedric to stand up and fight, but the old man just kept laughing. Melfiner reminded Kelvin to ask about the contract, and Zedric said serving a new king wasn't a problem. The important thing was whether Kelvin had enough power for him to submit. Kelvin was confident that he had that level, so he advised him to use all his strength to fight one battle with him. Finally, Zedric agreed to engage in an intense duel with Kelvin. Clodo's attacks from blind spots were all blocked by Zedric, proving that he had the skill to instantly judge situations. Kelvin then used an earth wall to create a smokescreen for Clodo to explode. Yet Zedric remained unharmed and could still launch a lethal sword attack that almost hit Kelvin. No matter what tricks Kelvin and Clodo pulled, Zedric still delivered extremely decisive blows, impressing Kelvin greatly. Next, Kelvin used super gravity to stop all of Zedric's movement. Unexpectedly, this inadvertently helped him remember a part of his past. Previously, Zedric had lived in a beautiful and peaceful country. One day, someone claiming to be a messenger from the Western continent demanded that the king submit to the Shira Empire. King Azuka had refused this proposal and received threats in return. Just a few days later, the country of Azuka was officially destroyed. Only Zedric and his daughter survived. Carrying his wife's dying wish, he had to take his daughter elsewhere to live. After a long period facing harsh conditions, his only remaining relative also didn't survive. The pain of losing his home and family was still there, making it impossible for Zedric to find peace. He angrily broke free from the supergravity and rushed to attack Kelvin. Kelvin continued to use supergravity combined with Clodo and successfully blew Zedric away. The next day, Kelvin brought Zedric's armor to the Adventurers Guild to confirm the successful completion of the commission. Everyone praised him as a novice dinosaur for being able to defeat the Dark Knight along with Casho's gang. By now, all three had been thrown into prison and were awaiting their execution day. Ange informed that this commission had a difficulty level above D class, so Kelvin would be promoted and the guild leader would personally come to thank him. Ange was very impressed with Kelvin's abilities, and even he was too, as the Dark Knight was truly a formidable opponent. As for Zedric, after signing a contract with Kelvin, he continuously teased Ange as a candidate to be Kelvin's wife. Hearing this, Melina was displeased because in the past, someone had sworn that he only loved her. Kelvin also requested Zedric not to call him Your Majesty anymore, but the old man refused, leaving Kelvin shaking his head in exasperation. After walking a few steps, Kelvin suddenly saw an elegant man standing in front of him. After a few casual conversations, Kelvin easily recognized that the person before him was the guild master of the Pazu branch of the Adventurers Guild. Rion also easily identified Kelvin as someone from another world using his A-class appraisal skill. Kelvin was extremely worried because the identity he had been hiding all this time had been seen through by this man. Additionally, Rion knew that Kelvin was a summoner, making him even more wary of the man in front of him. Zedric immediately reminded Kelvin to be confident because the other party could be a friend, not an enemy. So Kelvin could speak more naturally and mentioned that he knew about Casho but had let them freely cause trouble. Since Casho came from a prestigious noble family, it was very difficult for Rion to take action. Nevertheless, they had always been secretly gathering evidence. But when it came time to make a move, Kelvin had acted one step ahead. After Rion promised to deal with them properly, Kelvin asked him to get to the main point. Rion expressed his desire to cooperate with Kelvin because he had previously met people from other worlds. They were a group of heroes summoned to the Tiramisu Holy Kingdom. Melina said those were people she had transferred before, and if she felt like it, she would tell the details later. Rion recounted that the priestess of Tiramisu had been given divine foresight, so she knew that the demon lord was about to be resurrected. That could also be the reason why monsters across the continent were gradually becoming more ferocious. If the demon lord truly revived, Rion wanted all heroes to gather to defeat him. Hearing this, Kelvin immediately understood that they wanted him to stand up and eliminate monsters in place of the heroes. Currently, they were also lacking people who could complete commissions above B class like him. Therefore, they promised to pay Kelvin a worthy reward and grant him special promotion as well as accept any commission that he wanted. Rion guessed that Kelvin was hiding his identity because he didn't want to be drawn into the power struggle of the nobility. So if Kelvin agreed to cooperate, Rion would certainly give him freedom. He knew well that Kelvin's skills were on par with an S-class adventurer, so he advised him to quickly climb to the top before being swallowed by some force. With those juicy conditions, Kelvin had no reason to refuse and officially cooperated with Rion. The news that Kelvin had just become a B-class adventurer quickly spread to the landlady's ears. To celebrate this good news, she decided to cook an additional dish for his dinner menu tonight. Karia's appearance made the goat god believe she was Kelvin's new wife. Even Melina blamed Kelvin for looking at other mountains while standing on one, giving the young man a headache. While enjoying lunch, Melina recounted that not long ago, the goddess of the Holy Kingdom had conducted a ritual to summon people from other worlds. So Melina had selected handsome men and beautiful women to be transported to this world to become heroes who would destroy the demon lord. Melina said that had nothing to do with Kelvin, so she advised him not to get involved. Kelvin inadvertently recalled his life or death battle with Zedric and became extremely excited about the appearance of heroes and the Demon Lord. Kelvin then asked Clodo to give him the previous reward money to buy something important. After that, the young man asked Caria to cook another meal for dinner, then excitedly went to buy himself a slave. Zedric teased Kelvin, so he explained that the team needed more members to enhance their strength. The last time he passed through that alley, Kelvin had noticed a girl, so this time he would go there to buy her. The duel between him and Zedric had been quite close, showing that Kelvin needed to increase his fighting power, as he couldn't know how strong his future opponents would be. The person Kelvin was targeting had never used skill points. She would become his attacker, supporting him from behind in battles. Just as Kelvin arrived, he happened to witness a man being burned by fire after touching a slave on the cart. The owner recounted that the elf girl carried a curse, so anyone who touched her would catch fire. Kelvin saw that the girl's skill points were still unused, so he asked Melina how to lift that curse. She guessed it was the Fire Dragon King's curse, so using a class white magic would possibly neutralize it. After hearing this, Kelvin left and returned in the afternoon to ask about buying the girl. While the owner kept rambling about the elf's curse, Kelvin threw him a lump of money, so the owner immediately opened the door for the girl to go with her new master. On the way home, the girl introduced herself as Nenah and was extremely grateful to Kelvin for buying her. She confided that she had been sold as a slave since birth, so she didn't know what her parents looked like. Moreover, she carried a curse, so she always felt inferior and had low self-esteem. Kelvin wanted to comfort her but quickly moved away for fear of being injured like others. However, Kelvin had easily dispelled the curse and could touch her normally, amazing the girl. He also helped Nenah remove all chains and told her that from now on, she would no longer hurt anyone. Nenah burst into tears before the great favor Kelvin had brought after a series of days living in hell. It turned out that earlier, Kelvin had used all his remaining skill points to learn a class white magic, then returned to save this girl. Afterward, Kelvin took her back to the inn to have dinner first before introducing the girl to the landlady. But Caria wanted to help Nenah bathe thoroughly before eating. Initially, Nenah was still shy, but when she realized she was no longer dangerous, she became more proactive with Caria. So the girl was immediately carried inside by Caria, leaving Kelvin alone with his hungry stomach. The young man waited for what felt like his entire youth until finally, the landlady brought Nenah back. Kelvin stood frozen for 5 seconds before her beautiful appearance, making Nenah also feel embarrassed. When she calmed down, Nenah promised to work hard for her master and hoped to receive his care in the coming time. After both enjoyed dinner, Kelvin introduced her to his teammates and even revealed that he was a summoner. First, Kelvin would give her double skill points and growth rate, while how to use points for other skills, he left entirely to Nenah to decide. For now, everything was going very well, except that Kelvin had to sleep on a narrow bed with her. Although he had asked Caria to find another room with 2 beds, unfortunately, there were no vacant rooms now. So every night, the god Kelvin was tortured by the adorable appearance of the girl without her knowing anything. It had been a month since Kelvin had accepted Nenah as a teammate, and they had completed commissions very smoothly. Nenah not only leveled up, but also upgraded her archery and eagle eye skills. After promotion, she also learned sewing skills. A prime example was the maid outfit she was wearing, which was also a work after being resewn and enhanced multiple times. Kelvin was not outdone and learned blacksmithing skills, though still with some shortcomings. Although she was a newcomer, she could combine archery with the blessing of the Fire Dragon King very excellently. After completing a commission, they both went to the Adventurers Guild to receive the reward. Ange announced that they had completed 9 consecutive commissions. If they completed the next commission, they could participate in the promotion exam. Nenah was excited because with just a little more effort, she would be promoted to a class. However, Kelvin felt that the opponent in the previous skill assessment match was too pitiful, because the examiner continuously received arrows from Nenah despite being considered an experienced person. Ange discovered that a new bakery had recently opened, so she invited Nenah to go there together. Nenah also wanted Kelvin to come along but was shy, so Ange took action to make the young man go no matter what. So Kelvin promised that when he was free tomorrow, he would go buy cakes with them, making Ange very happy. The next day, when Kelvin arrived at the meeting point, he discovered that this place was mostly for couples on dates. He felt lucky that Melina wasn't here, or she would grumble endlessly. When Ange arrived, there was no sign of Nenah, so Kelvin said she was busy getting ready and would come later. Ange wanted Kelvin to stop using formal language because they had become friends, so he readily agreed. At this moment, Nenah appeared with an extremely adorable appearance, making him unconsciously moved. Ange quickly nudged Kelvin a few times, bringing him back to reality to compliment Nenah's beautiful outfit. Ange noticed she was much plumper than a month ago, proving that Kelvin had taken very good care of her. While eating, Nenah naturally fed Kelvin, which made Ange tease them. This scene was also witnessed by those three guys, and they were very jealous because some people had everything while others had nothing. Kelvin explained that they didn't usually do such actions, but Ange still insisted on feeding Kelvin herself. Faced with the gossip of people around, Kelvin could only tell them to eat first, and he would take cakes back to the inn to eat later. Suddenly, an arrogant guy appeared and kicked away the meal of the three people just because he was irritated seeing them close to each other. He relied on being the third prince of the Torisen country to behave presumptuously, making Kelvin quite uncomfortable. They were about to deal with Kelvin beautifully to teach him an unforgettable lesson when Tabira suddenly wanted to go further with Nenah. He even dared to ask her to give herself to him, and he would erase all her crimes. So Kelvin immediately struck the two green soldiers, knocking them out. Then he used gravity to prevent Tabira from moving and forced him to reveal why he came to Pazu. Tabira confessed that he needed to meet Rion because he heard there was a very powerful adventurer settling here. Kelvin was surprised that a prince like him brought along two incompetent guards. Tabira revealed that he was nothing more than a puppet prince, so he could only bring them along. Therefore, Tabira wanted to recruit skilled adventurers as his subordinates and then establish merits for himself. Kelvin said he was the person Tabira was looking for, but there was no way he would become his subordinate. After dealing with him, Kelvin went with Ange to buy sweets that they hadn't enjoyed earlier. Before Kelvin's awesome protection, Nenah was extremely grateful and moved by him. At the Daramisu Holy Kingdom, Khalid was begging the goddess Melina to appear and provide further guidance for the country. Wish granted, Melina appeared and asked about the current situation of the heroes. Khalid reported that their group was still growing stronger, which pleased Melina very much. So she announced that in the western continent, there was an evil force present, so Khalid should send the heroes there. Most importantly, they must not be allowed near Pazu. And then she quickly disappeared. Right after that, the hero group also immediately appeared to receive the next instructions from the priestess Khalid. That night, Nenah couldn't sleep, so she kept thanking Kelvin for helping her escape from Tabira's clutches. Kelvin told her not to worry and also apologized for making her lie in such a cramped place. Nenah suddenly sat up and asked Kelvin if she wasn't attractive. Nenah cried while confessing her feelings for her master, making him extremely confused. Kelvin encouraged her, saying she was very cute and had unparalleled attraction, which she liked very much. Nenah just hugged Kelvin tightly, making him want to find a new room as soon as possible because at this rate, he wouldn't be able to bear it. The next day, while everyone was focusing on examining the skills of the hero group, Nenah brought tea to offer them. Despite being called heroes, Kelvin remarked that their levels were not too high. Melina was a bit disappointed because they had progressed too slowly despite it being a year since they had reincarnated here. With this situation, Melina wasn't sure if the hero group had enough ability to face the demon lord. In contrast to them, Kelvin's group was becoming more and more powerful. Kelvin's blacksmithing skills had now increased significantly, although there had been quite a few failed products before. Nevertheless, Kelvin's masterpieces must be mentioned. The A-class black battle shield and the cloak Zedric was wearing. There was also a cloak created by Nenah's sewing skills, very convenient during battle. While the group was chatting, Mrs. Karia announced that the Adventurers Guild needed Kelvin to come there immediately. Rion had just received news that someone had discovered the hiding place of a demon in a B-class dungeon. Demons were one of the strongest species, possibly on par with dragons and angels. Although it was sealed, the adventurers there needed to be very cautious. Rion was hesitant whether to ask Kelvin for help or an S-class adventurer, because the strength of the demon was still unknown. Melina knew well that demons had different characteristics, so even if they were low-ranked, they would still be from B-class upwards. Suddenly, Rion mentioned that Prince Tabira had been beaten by someone, making Kelvin feel uncomfortable. Rion said he had handled that matter with great difficulty and had almost affected all diplomatic relations with Torisen. In fact, Rion already knew that it was done by Kelvin, so he deliberately hinted at it, forcing him to accept this commission. After saying that, they all set off for Dungeon D and coincidentally met Yaruto again. The uncle wondered who Zedric was, so he introduced himself as a friend who came to help Kelvin. At this time, people were setting up barriers around to prevent the seal from being ineffective against the demon. With their current levels, the others could only stand outside on alert and leave the reconnaissance to Kelvin's group. Before going down, Nenah had to create a firelight to illuminate the way down the tunnel. But even after traveling quite a distance, they still hadn't seen any monsters. Kelvin sensed something unusual because he couldn't see any signs of life here. After a while, the group discovered a strange room ahead. Kelvin sensed two presences in this room. One was the demon, and the other seemed to be weakening. Kelvin planned to deal with that one first, and if favorable, would recruit it as a subordinate. When they entered, what caught everyone's eye was the image of a red-haired girl being imprisoned. and the demon they thought was sealed was freely introducing himself as Victor, a high-level demon. Normally, low-level demons were already equivalent to B-class, but this one was high-level, so Kelvin was a bit worried. Zedric wondered who the red-haired woman was, and Victor laughed sinisterly. He didn't hide and revealed that she was the daughter of the Demon Lord. If counting in the most recent era, she could be the daughter of Demon Lord Gustav. But no one knew because Gustav had many enemies, so he had to hide that fact. Actually, Victor had deliberately cleared out the monsters to lure them here, because that seal could only be removed by humans. Kelvin thought Victor wanted him to break the chains, but what he wanted was to kill them to steal their power. Having said that, he immediately rushed to attack Zedric, but he was able to defend himself. Because Victor possessed the Beelzebub skill, he could steal the characteristics of the people he ate. In cases where the relationship value with that person was closer, it would bring more effect. Kelvin had understood Victor's purpose in eating them to gain human characteristics. After that, he would break the seal and bring that girl back as the Demon Lord. Although Kelvin had used super gravity on Victor, he could still move around easily. And Kelvin had guessed wrong because Victor wanted to eat Shira as well to gain enormous power to become the new Demon Lord. The first time encountering such a strong opponent as Victor made Kelvin unable to contain his excitement. Zedric recalled when the two of them dueled. Kelvin had also smiled like that because he was a genuine battle maniac. From the pile of debris, Victor suddenly created a hell army to confront them. Nevertheless, Kelvin calmly used wind blades to sweep away one after another. Faced with such a large number of enemies, Zedric decided to attack at the front line and let Kelvin deal with those who got past him. Victor was very amused by their strength and seamless coordination. He felt Kelvin was quite arrogant and a battle maniac because he had been mocking him all this time. So Victor declared he would extinguish that smile with his terrifying power. Victor chose to create a smokescreen to obstruct their vision, confusing Zedric a bit. But Kelvin sensed that Victor was using the earth diving skill and would attack from below. Thanks to Kelvin's reminder, Zedric blocked Victor's attack and counterattacked. He was also very skilled, simultaneously using his tail to ambush Kelvin. Unfortunately, Kelvin was still one step ahead. Although Zedric was strong, he was no match for this monster. Then Victor continued to use his tail to attack Kelvin, almost turning him into a meal. Fortunately, Clodo arrived just in time to absorb Victor's magic power. Taking advantage of that moment, Kelvin immediately used the Glory Sanctuary to lock one of Victor's arms, impressing him. However, that only had a temporary effect, so before he could break it, Zedric once again charged forward. Zedric had secretly extended his hand behind Kelvin to ambush him. However, Kelvin remained calm because he was still hiding behind Victor's back. Victor hadn't anticipated this move because Nenah's concealment skill had reached a level where even he couldn't sense it. Nenah suddenly unleashed a Hellfire arrow, turning Victor's remaining arm into a piece of roasted meat. Zedric immediately seized the opportunity to take one of Victor's arms, pleasing Kelvin greatly. However, the effect of the Glory Sanctuary had worn off, so Kelvin called for everyone to keep their distance from him. Victor revealed that Kelvin was the second person with the ability to beat him up so badly. However, all of this was still nothing to Victor because for him, the game was only just beginning. Right after that, Victor transformed his body. Therefore, everyone had to quickly attack to weaken him. However, they were still a step behind, so Kelvin wanted Zedric to unlock all his loyalty skills to fight Victor to the death. Kelvin asked Zedric to use emergency defense to stop Victor, or the whole group would be shattered. Despite Zedric's efforts, he was completely powerless against Victor's great strength. When he was about to finish him off, Kelvin timely intervened and encouraged Zedric to rise up. So both of them simultaneously launched rapid attacks on Victor, causing him considerable difficulty. Next, Clodo continuously fired Kelvin's failed weapons, making it hard for Victor to defend. Finally, all three joined forces to target Victor and successfully defeated him. Although injured, when he saw Shira in danger, he still risked his life to protect her. So Kelvin asked him why he lied about eating Shira when he disregarded his own life to save her. It turned out Victor had to do that to make Kelvin fight with all his might. Moreover, he had been entrusted by Demon Lord Gustav with the important task of protecting Shira for hundreds of years. Since Shira was a child, Victor had always been the one teaching her to train. Because Shira couldn't chant magic spells or throw punches, she always lost to Victor. Nevertheless, he still encouraged Shira to practice gradually because demons have very long lifespans. When mentioning this, Shira always felt lonely because she had to live in this palace forever. What's more, recently her father had often gone far away without returning, making her very sad. Actually, Gustav also had his own suffering because he didn't want Shira to be targeted, so he had to hide her identity. Every day, Victor served as a nanny, the only friend beside Shira. However, the beautiful days quickly ended when the hero group discovered this place. With their formidable army, the castle soon fell. Victor intended to fight until his last breath, but Gustav ordered him to live to take care of Shira. If Shira's existence was revealed, not only heroes but other demonic forces would target her. So Gustav had to cast a seal that only humans could break. When Gustav left, the teleportation magic was activated, taking Shira to a distant land. For hundreds of years, Victor had been hoping that the heroes would disappear to usher in an era where Shira could become the new demon lord. Unfortunately, he couldn't wait for that day, so he requested Kelvin to let Shira become his teammate. Because Victor had recognized that Kelvin was a powerful summoner and, moreover, had monsters as teammates. Victor guessed Shira had awakened from her deep sleep, so all that was needed was to break the seal, and she would regain consciousness. Kelvin intended to heal Victor if he became his subordinate. This was truly an attractive offer. But in this life, Victor only had one master, Gustav. Victor knew he didn't have much time left, so he begged Kelvin to accept his request and then closed his eyes peacefully. Although knowing Shira's identity, Kelvin still decided to remove the seal. Indeed, she had always known everything that happened, so she was extremely heartbroken at the departure of her closest people. Afterward, the group went outside to give Yasudo evidence proving that he had eliminated the demon. When the uncle asked who Shira was, Kelvin lied that she had been sealed by the demon and was rescued by him. Earlier, he had used fake hairpins to help Shira hide her horns and demonic wings, and all of this was prepared by Gustav because it seemed he had anticipated this. Kelvin said Shira's health wasn't good, so they would return to town first. Yasudo guessed Zedric was also exhausted, leaving him at a loss for words. In fact, Zedric was uncomfortable because he had to hide his body's transformation. After the recent battle, Zedric had evolved into a Dawn Knight that appeared in S-Class dungeons. Even Zedric's shield, which had been destroyed, returned and became more powerful than before. While Zedric was proudly boasting, Kelvin teased him, saying just moments ago, someone was trembling like a wet dog in front of Victor. Shira worried that her identity would affect everyone. However, Kelvin, with his S-Class concealment skill, advised Shira not to worry too much and to trust him. Shira was still wary of Kelvin because he had defeated even Victor. The young man said he was just an ordinary adventurer who was a bit battle crazy. Since Shira had never been outside the mansion, when she heard about going to town, she was a bit nervous, so everyone encouraged Shira to help her be more confident. As soon as they reached town, Shira was excited by the hustle and bustle there and kept asking about everything. Before, Shira had only seen these things in books, so she couldn't contain her emotions right now. Since Kelvin had to go to the Adventurers Guild to report, he had to ask Nenah to take Shira back to the inn. Hearing this, she didn't want to be seen as a child because Shira was actually older than Nenah. Through this incident, Kelvin had been promoted to a class, but he wasn't very happy after talking with Rion. When the young man returned to the inn, he was surprised by the celebration party that everyone had prepared. On this occasion, Kelvin discovered that Karia and Uncle Yasudo were actually a married couple. Shira's appearance made everyone suspect that he and she had an ambiguous relationship. Nevertheless, the party continued boisterously to the point where everyone was rolling on the floor with laughter. Late at night, Kelvin woke up and didn't see Shira anywhere, so he went to look for her. Meanwhile, Shira was reminiscing about Victor and telling him how beautiful the outside world was. Recalling when she was young, Shira had wished to see the vast beaches, so Victor had promised to teach her how to swim. Currently, Shira had stepped out of her comfort zone to realize that dream, so she hoped her father and Victor in the other world were still watching over this little girl. After that battle, Kelvin's blacksmithing skill and Nenah's sewing skill reached his class, so he would organize a party to debut the new equipment. First, Kelvin let Shira test the S-Class black demonic weapon, and she seemed to like it quite a bit. Nenah gave Shira the nickname Crazy Queen, which she enjoyed because the name was really cool. He also used Victor's armor to create it because Shira believed Victor was always by her side, giving her strength. Kelvin also meticulously crafted a new demonic sword similar to the old one that Zedric had used. Shira wanted to see Kelvin and Nenah's equipment, but the young man wanted to keep it secret until they fought. Currently, Kelvin was quite tired and hungry because he had been buried in the workshop for a long time. Nenah immediately asked Kelvin what he wanted to eat, only to find the young man suddenly frantically demanding rice because he missed its delicious taste so much. To keep his promise to take Shira traveling around the world, Kelvin decided to take everyone to Torisen for a trip. On the way, Shira was extremely excited when she saw the river, so she went inside to show Kelvin. He learned that the place they were heading to was a water country with food similar to rice, so Kelvin wanted to go there right away. For some reason, Rion easily accepted the request, so the group had a chance to relax on a trip. Suddenly, Zedric noticed that Melina was absent again, so Kelvin explained it was due to the nature of her divine work. Specifically, Melina had to go adjust her artificial body, and if things went well, Kelvin could summon her. Before leaving, Melina teased Kelvin, warning him to be careful because he might fall in love with her again. Suddenly, Shira came in demanding that Kelvin take her boating, but he had to postpone it until next time. Nenah also competed for his attention by squeezing in to ask Kelvin something, making Zedric and Clodo understand why Melina was so eager to be summoned. From a while ago, Shira and Kelvin had been feeling that someone was observing them. Indeed, after going a short distance, a group of bandits calling themselves Black Wind appeared to block their way. The carriage driver informed that this was a gang that had recently emerged in Torisen. They should have been eliminated by A-Class adventurers already, but somehow they were still appearing. Kelvin saw that these bandits were only at levels 25 to 30, so he decided to let Shira handle them. However, she was not allowed to use the black demonic weapon because that would cause a very horrific scene. Seeing only Shira get off the carriage, they continuously mocked her, but right after that, they were knocked away by her. The remaining teammates also aggressively charged forward, but were mercilessly beaten by Shira. Even the biggest guy in the group was taken down by Shira with just one hand, without using much strength. Kelvin revealed that Shira's level was 75, so these bandits absolutely had no chance against her. So the Black Wind gang had been completely subdued by Shira, but they were still bragging that their boss was at level 70. Hearing this, Kelvin and Shira immediately approached the blue-haired girl to make her confess everything. Soon, the group also arrived at the water country. Looking at the vast sea before her eyes, Shira couldn't contain her emotions and wanted Kelvin to teach her how to swim. Even Nenah wanted to try, but there was still a lot of luggage to look after on the carriage, so they couldn't do that. First, the group went to the Torisen branch of the Adventurers Guild to meet Guild Master Mitsu. She was very grateful because Kelvin had helped them capture one of the ringleaders of the Black Wind gang. Mitsu mentioned that Rion frequently talked about Kelvin, making someone feel chills down their spine. Actually, Mitsu and Rion were adventurers in the same team 20 years ago. He was known as the Analyst because he frequently peeked at others' status. Getting back to the main issue, Mitsu recounted that the team that previously went to eliminate Black Wind had now become Black Wind. Kelvin knew they were the heroes of Torisen and Kristoff because at that time, they were so famous that they were always the topic of conversation for everyone. Currently, they were hiding under the guise of heroes to kidnap and illegally traffic people. Shira angrily declared she would make them pay if she knew where they were. Mitsu said Black Wind was right in Tazaji. But the problem wasn't that simple. Kristoff was being revered as a hero. If they acted rashly, there would be a risk of affecting the relationship between Toriji and Torisen. Shira was still eager to deal with them because they now had plenty of evidence in hand. Kelvin reminded Shira to restrain herself because, in reality, he wasn't interested in a level 70 person at all. Nevertheless, Kelvin still couldn't turn a blind eye. So he used mental communication with Shira. He asked her to sense the positions of the remaining members and learned that their levels were around 50. Kelvin grinned sinisterly because it was time for the hero group to take action. Then Mitsu called the hero group to help her capture the lair of the Black Wind bandit gang. The blue-haired one didn't want Tora to meddle in others' affairs because, according to Melina, they needed to reach the Daira Empire as soon as possible. But the young man still couldn't turn a blind eye, so the two began to argue with each other. Earlier, Kelvin and Mitsu had known the hero group was here. Therefore, she wanted them to eliminate the Black Wind gang, because if it were them, Torisen couldn't do anything. But Kelvin didn't want to sit idle and decided that he himself would be the one to deal with them. Meanwhile, one of the Black Wind gang members had gone to the detention area and taken a girl to serve him. Just as he was about to commit a vile act, Kelvin's group suddenly appeared. Zedric found Hoobs annoying, so he beat him up and rescued the women there. At the same time, Priscilla was very angry because today was her day off, yet Kristoff dared to call her here. He informed her that Kana's slave hunting team had been eliminated, making her panic. If this matter were exposed, other countries would certainly not let it slide, and they might even be abandoned by Torisen. Priscilla told Adu to do something, but he didn't care because he only wanted to fight strong opponents. Kristoff told her to stay calm because he was having Hoobs investigate. Suddenly, Kelvin's group burst in and ambushed the Black Wind gang, leaving them no chance to retaliate. Initially, Priscilla thought there would be an interesting battle, but Kelvin had no interest in him because he would quickly sweep them all away to welcome the main meal coming here. At this moment, Tora's group was entering this place, just as Kelvin had anticipated. Nenah didn't see anyone and was very anxious because earlier, Mitsu had said A-Class adventurers had arrived. Tora asked Asuna to use her presence-sensing skill to see if anyone was here. After checking, Asuna saw a group of people gathering deep inside the tunnel. Murabi also found this place too unusual with no signs of battle at all. Nevertheless, everyone still decided to prioritize finding the kidnapped group first and then figure out what to do next. After a while of searching, the group found a room, but Asuna still couldn't sense any danger at all. Tora decided to take a risk and supported everyone as they rushed inside. What caught Tora's eye was Clodo, so he thought it was an enemy and was about to make a move. However, Juka immediately stood up to protect Clodo and informed them that it and Kelvin were the benefactors who saved everyone's lives. The little girl's mother explained that earlier, her child had been rescued by a group of adventurers, so she greatly admired them. In response to the other party's curiosity, Tora introduced himself as a hero from Desamisu. Because the brown-haired girl could talk to Clodo, she knew it was only protecting the kidnapped people. Suddenly, Juka's mother begged Tora to go save the adventurer group that had just rescued them, because the leaders of the Black Wind gang were very strong, making it difficult for everyone to win. With a spirit of righteousness, Tora didn't hesitate to go save everyone even though he knew the opponent was formidable. When the group arrived at the scene, what greeted their eyes was an extremely tragic sight. The young man didn't know and thought they were the A-class adventurer group, misunderstanding that Kelvin's group was his opponent. Everything went according to Kelvin's plan, so he continued to mock them as weak adventurers to awaken the hero's spirit. Tora declared that he would eliminate evil in the name of justice, making Kelvin laugh uncontrollably. He proposed that he would fight all four of them, and the loser would have to follow any command from the winner. Tora, of course, didn't agree and wanted to fight Kelvin himself. But Asuna stopped Tora because she had a feeling that Kelvin was hiding something. Notably, Kelvin's cloak contained enormous power, so they needed to be especially careful. Hearing this, Tora changed his mind and agreed to fight together with everyone. The reason he did these things was because he wanted to use the winner's authority to require the hero group to become witnesses. That way, the Black Wind gang would lose support from Torisen and be punished. Zedric even teased Kelvin, saying only a battle maniac could come up with such a meticulous plan. Shira was upset because only Kelvin got to fight. But what could she do since she had already had fun stirring up trouble on the way here? To appease Shira, Kelvin asked Nenah to bring out lunch so they could eat while enjoying the battle. She also didn't agree with Kelvin fighting alone because the hero group wasn't easy to deal with. But Kelvin wanted to test measures to fight against large numbers to overcome his weakness. And this time, Kelvin also equipped the evil realization gloves to consume skills, so he advised them not to worry too much. On the other side, the hero group was extremely annoyed by Kelvin's arrogance and cruelty. To take revenge on him, the group successively borrowed power from the spirits. Tora guessed Kelvin was a dark mage, so he chose to shorten the distance for close combat. Kelvin immediately flew up and used the Imperial Spear to counterattack them, surprising Asuna. At this moment, Nenah suddenly used the dragon's breath to attack Kelvin, but he still managed to avoid it in time. It turned out Kelvin had just used magic to increase his speed and secretly consumed Marabi's skill. That was the new ability created from Victor's armor fragment that Kelvin mentioned earlier. It had the ability to copy a maximum of 2 skills, but each time a copy was made, the new skill would overwrite the previous one. Kelvin was very satisfied because he had copied Mizabi's parallel thinking skill. Suddenly Zedric wanted to know what Kelvin had copied from Shira, but she refused to tell. Seeing this, Tora immediately rushed to combat with Kelvin so that the sister team could come to restore Marabi. Importantly, Tora also wanted to test the opponent's strength because just relying on large numbers didn't guarantee defeating Kelvin. And again, Tora was very confident that his swordsmanship was more skilled than Kelvin's, even though he was mocked as a half-baked swordsman. Tora continuously stayed close to Kelvin so he couldn't use magic. However, Kelvin could still block all of Tora's sword moves with his bare hands, shocking everyone. Seeing this, Zedric immediately realized that Kelvin had borrowed Shira's class martial arts skill, so he was being more reckless than thoughtful. Seeing Tora in difficulty, Asuna immediately rushed to assist. To avoid Asuna's move, Kelvin quickly used the highest earth magic, creating the Adamant Fortress. However, this didn't trouble Asuna because she just needed to execute the iron-cutting fist to slice it in half. Kelvin surprisingly ambushed Asuna, but Tora managed to save her from an obvious defeat. Seeing Tora injured, Nenah came to help him recover, but he refused. Tora said he had a mission to rescue and bring peace to the world, so he would personally deal with Kelvin. After saying that, Tora was immediately slapped by Asuna because the young man was always passionate about justice and never thought about himself. Asuna suddenly remembered that on a beautiful day, the group was unexpectedly summoned by the goddess to this place to become heroes. Asuna was extremely anxious, but because everyone was by her side, she always tried her best. However, Tora always carried the burden of fighting for everyone, which they couldn't accept. Although Tora was the pillar of the group, if the group didn't work together, they would never defeat the Demon Lord. After Asuna's mind-opening technique, the young man also realized that he had been too restless and coordinated with the group to fight Kelvin. As soon as they returned to the race, they blinded Kelvin with the light spirit. Nenah then used the ice spirit to hold Kelvin in place for Merabi to use a technique similar to super gravity on him. Faced with this precarious situation, Nenah couldn't sit still. However, Kelvin exploded the ground and reversed the situation in an instant. If Tora and Asuna didn't have the shield of the light spirit and the speed support of the wind spirit, they would have been in life-threatening danger. After that, Kelvin used white magic to regain his lost vision, and importantly, he didn't have a single injury. Kelvin praised the recent connection as quite impressive because it had made him a little nervous. To everyone's astonishment, Kelvin arrogantly stated that he would never let the game end with his own magic. The young man also reminded Nenah and Merabi to use more attack magic after casting obstructive magic. Asuna needed to coordinate attacks with Theurn B-letter 189 more because she always attacked directly. Kelvin wondered when Tora would use dual swords, so the young man immediately took out his sacred sword to fight, exciting Kelvin greatly. Although Tora risked himself to go first, his teammates were not outdone and successively unleashed all their power. Nenah executed the freezing divine temple, preventing Kelvin from moving or activating support magic. Mizabi decided to wash away his grudge against Kelvin here, so he summoned the undead corpses. Seeing this, Shira teased Kelvin, asking if he needed her help, but at this level, he could still handle everything. Then Merabi launched the Annihilation Spear, forcing Kelvin to use Adamant Guardian to help block its damage. Kelvin ordered the golems to hold the hero group for 30 seconds so he could concentrate on creating a new magic. Normally, it would require a specific iconic structure to create magic and a spell structure to activate it over a long period. But if using the parallel thinking that had been copied from Jabai, he could completely do it at super speed. Seeing this, Asuna hurriedly cut down a golem. However, Kelvin had completed the new structure and shattered Nana's freezing divine temple. She couldn't believe how Kelvin knew how to neutralize it, so he explained that everything was analyzed with the appraisal eye. While Nenah was casually explaining the magic, Kelvin already knew the answer. On her side, Asuna had absorbed Kelvin's advice and applied it to this attack. However, her speed was still too slow, so she was defeated by Kelvin. Even the undead corpse's punch controlled by Merabi was very strong. Unfortunately, compared to Shira's punch, it still wasn't in the same league. This time, Nenah switched to using crystallized ice shields aimed directly at Kelvin. But she was sealed by the young man's glory sanctuary and knocked unconscious by a multi-layered shock wave. All teammates were defeated by Kelvin, causing Tora to express extreme resentment. The young man recklessly rushed at Kelvin and questioned him to use that power to do something useful for this world. So Kelvin finished off Tora and reminded him not to impose that hero ideal on others, and instead do everything to make himself stronger. After regaining consciousness, Tora was about to attack Kelvin again, but when he saw Clodo, he realized that he was the adventurer who had rescued everyone. The young man regretted misunderstanding, and Shira revealed that it was all a conspiracy created by Kelvin. Tora understood the reason Kelvin did this was for the good of the group, so he knelt down and admitted defeat. So Kelvin required the hero group to carry out the punishment, which was to go bare-chested in broad daylight, shocking everyone. Afterward, the victims who had been kidnapped were escorted home by the Adventurers Guild, and the Black Wind group would be prosecuted for their crimes and receive appropriate punishment. After finishing, Kelvin didn't forget to thank Mitsu and continue to enjoy the half-finished trip, claiming it was tourism. But in reality, Kelvin had become an unwilling master taking the hero group for training. Tora was continuously powerless against the monster's tentacles, so Asuna had to rush forward to assist. However, its body just softened, making it impossible for them to cut. What's more, the octopus also unleashed electrical attacks, so Kelvin instructed Nenah and Merabi to focus intensely. If the front line couldn't retreat in time, they should freeze the water to create distance. Shira asked why Kelvin was training them, and he said they were the people Melina had chosen, and also his fellow countrymen. Yet Shira thought Kelvin was helping them level up for a rematch. The young man found that idea very good and decided to apply it when the hero group became more mature. Finally, they managed to defeat the monster, so Nenah called everyone to have lunch. While eating, Shira kept lecturing about the steel punch, but Tora and Asuna didn't understand anything. Suddenly, Asuna mentioned the influence of the demon lord causing dungeon monsters to become stronger. Tora said the priestess had mentioned this when they were transported here. Kelvin asked if they found it difficult fighting the octopus. What would happen when they encountered an S-class dungeon boss? Tora said at this point they could only run away, when suddenly battle-hungry Shira brought that dungeon boss right here. Kelvin said if they ran away, residents around or teammates would be at risk of injury. Therefore, Tora promised not to recklessly fight, but would think of ways to counter and help the group win. Kelvin acknowledged that the hero group had grown more than at the beginning and told them to always maintain that spirit, since the ship had already sailed several days ago. The hero group needed to leave before it was too late. Kelvin also gave the entire group safety charms as farewell gifts, making Tora extremely grateful. He promised that the next time they met, the group would definitely be stronger than now. Kelvin knew that across the sea was the Dara Empire, which had destroyed Zedric's homeland. Kelvin wasn't sure if they would win if they went to war with Dara now. Zedric shared that since journeying with Kelvin, he had become so strong that the impossible dream of the past was about to be realized. So Kelvin said they would do that together after fighting the strong ones here. Nenah said Kelvin was so kind because the necklaces he gave to Tora's group all had stat-increasing effects and secret effects. Kelvin immediately switched to sassy mode, saying it would be better if they didn't use them. Suddenly Shira came running to inform that Mitsu had called for Kelvin because someone wanted to see him. Kelvin mentioned their original purpose for coming here was to find rice, and that moment had finally arrived. As soon as they arrived, Kelvin was impressed by the Japanese-style castle in front. Zedric had heard that the first king of Torisen had come from another world like the heroes, so the unique design style of the castle was probably brought by him. Nenah didn't know if the king was summoned by the priestess or arrived by another method that they didn't know. When they entered, Kelvin immediately noticed the tatami mats below, so he took off his shoes outside. This gave the king a good impression, and he judged Kelvin as an erudite person. After this greeting, Kelvin learned that the king's name was Tsubaki, and was also the first person with a surname that he had ever met. The young man was quite surprised because Shira, who was usually very playful, was now so serious. Tsubaki also didn't like rigid ceremonies, so he allowed the group to raise their heads and talk. Since everyone had made great contributions, Tsubaki needed to publicly congratulate this throughout the country. But Torisen was still eyeing them, so they couldn't announce the news at such a sensitive time. Therefore, Tsubaki allowed the group to request anything, and Kelvin asked for the right to buy grain in the water country. Tsubaki said Kelvin had the right to choose more valuable things, but he declined because food was their truth. Tsubaki found Kelvin interesting, unlike that greedy hero of Torisen. Tsubaki told Kelvin he not only had the right to buy, but could buy as much as he wanted. If it ran out, just send a letter, and Tsubaki would send it all free of charge to Kelvin. Additionally, Tsubaki also organized a small party for everyone to eat and drink to their heart's content. Among all the delicacies in front of him, what made Kelvin happiest was still the hot bowl of white rice. Nenah's group was busy enjoying Japanese dishes, while the two drunkards, Zedric and Shira, were competing in drinking. After eating, Nenah asked the seniors for Japanese cooking recipes, making Kelvin very pleased. Having accepted Tsubaki's invitation, the group stayed here for a few more days. Nenah still took responsibility for bringing lunch to Kelvin, and she had become proficient in cooking wonderful Japanese dishes. Even Tsubaki couldn't resist Nenah's magical hands and came to dine with Kelvin every day. The queen even used female charm to lure Kelvin to stay and serve Tazaji so he could stay here forever. Kelvin soberly declined because recently there had been many monsters appearing around Pazu. Tsubaki then switched to inviting the young man to become the person by her side day and night. But he still kept his distance and once again had to be disrespectful to Tsubaki. Nevertheless, whenever Kelvin changed his mind, the queen would always be willing to welcome him. Tsubaki even gave special permission for Kelvin to use the instant teleportation gate to return to Pazu. Nenah wished Tora's group could also use this to the western continent. However, teleportation required an enormous amount of magic power and permission from the managers on both sides, so not everyone could use it. Initially, Kelvin thought they weren't allowed by Pazu, but Tsubaki enlightened him that on their adventure cards, a prohibition seal had been stamped by Guild Master Rion. As soon as Kelvin heard that name, he was more bitter than eating chilies because he had been tricked by that old man again. When the gate opened, it was time for everyone to say goodbye to return to dear Pazu. Thanks to Ange's gossiping, Mrs. Correa knew that Kelvin had caught the queen's attention. But Kelvin said he only wanted to be a free adventurer. Since they had just returned from a long trip, Kelvin would give everyone a day off. The young man planned to go out for a while, making the landlady suspect that Kelvin was buying another slave. But what Kelvin wanted to buy most was a house. Talk about action. Kelvin immediately bought a castle as a base and allowed everyone to choose rooms as they wished. While Shira went to find a room, Nenah only hoped to be near Kelvin's room, saying she would accept anywhere small. Zedric was excitedly going to check the storage area to make it a training place that Kelvin had mentioned earlier. As for Clodo, it wanted to be outside, so the garden would be its base. The first place Kelvin visited was the bathtub, and it was also the main factor that made him buy this house. Additionally, Kelvin also let Juka and her mother come to work as servants because they had applied before. That night, Kelvin was extremely comfortable because he had been soaking in the bathtub he had always dreamed of. Although lying in such a luxurious place, Kelvin inadvertently recalled the bed at the old inn. Kelvin was about to go to sleep when he realized Melina had returned. so the young man couldn't resist and had to summon her immediately. Indeed, as soon as he saw Melina, someone swallowed their saliva because she was truly his type. After months of anticipation, Melina finally got to taste Nenah's famously skilled cooking. After eating, Melina immediately blamed Kelvin for moving houses without notice, making it very difficult for her to find him. Zedric asked who this beauty was, so Melina introduced her identity to everyone. Initially, Melina was afraid that Shira wouldn't like her because of Demon Lord Gustav's matter. However, Shira didn't blame Melina because the heroes at that time weren't summoned by her. Zedric kept thinking Kelvin was recruiting new girlfriends to his harem. Yet Melina also added fuel to the fire by declaring to everyone that she was the primary wife. Nenah saw Kelvin choking and immediately took care of him, making the relationship between them even more ambiguous. Since Melina was the name of a widely known deity, from now on, everyone would call her Mel. Because Kelvin had successfully summoned Mel, she had given him a reward, the blessing of the Reincarnation god. This would protect Kelvin from fatal wounds once a month. Hearing this, Shira immediately wanted to use all her strength to fight Kelvin during practice sessions, making him terrified. Mel revealed that besides that, it also had another function, summoning heroes. The next day, Mel and Shira decided to fight each other in an extremely intense duel. While the two were fighting, Kelvin was worried about whether the hero group had reached the western continent yet. At this point, Shira had used Victor's demonic power, so Mel also responded with angelic power. The battle was very fierce, and the result was that both were equally matched. Zedric asked why the two had to confront each other, only to learn they were competing for the right to sleep with Kelvin. Juka also wanted to sleep with the master, but was told not to rush because she wasn't old enough yet. After the battle, they both went to the bathtub to soak and relax. Nenah asked if they were injured anywhere, but Shira said they had been treated by Kelvin. Mel noticed he wasn't very focused, so she guessed Kelvin was preoccupied with what she had said earlier. After all, Kelvin was also someone summoned here, so he must have thoughts they couldn't understand. A moment later, Mel came to see Kelvin to ask what was troubling him. So the young man asked why they needed heroes. Mel explained that the appearance of the Demon Lord in the world was something that couldn't be changed. All generations of Demon Lords without exception had skills, especially the Heavenly Demon Break. That skill had the effect of spreading and amplifying evil intent to the point of changing personality. Additionally, it could also nullify the opponent's damage, so only heroes inheriting extraordinary power could neutralize the Demon Lord's attributes. If so, Kelvin could also do it without needing to summon heroes. Mel said that was true, but everything needed exceptions. Because Kelvin had no memories, he integrated more easily with this world compared to others. But Tora's group wasn't like that because they weren't just brought here, but also had to bear the responsibility of being heroes. Seeing Kelvin still hesitant, Mel explained that teleportation summoning meant bringing living people here, while summoning the souls of the deceased and restructuring their bodies was reincarnation summoning. However, this method had to consume a lot of mana, so it wasn't suitable for summoning many people. Therefore, this method was usually used to summon highly capable people like Kelvin. Importantly, he could choose privileges and skills because body restructuring also had the ability to change age and appearance. Mel reassured Kelvin that he was still the same as before because changes would cost many skill points. The selection of souls for reincarnation was random, so Mel wanted Kelvin to think slowly. That night, Kelvin decided to perform reincarnation summoning because he wanted to strengthen the team's fighting power to keep his promise to Zedric. Moreover, it was also a precaution in case the hero group couldn't subdue the Demon Lord. So he instructed Juka and her mother to be careful because the master was about to conduct a special summoning. Kelvin planned to let the reincarnated person live as they wished, and Mel also approved of this. First, Kelvin had to dismiss summoning and then supplement with medicine to restore mana to the maximum. After that, Mel would use the blessing privilege to conduct reincarnation summoning. Meanwhile, Kelvin was responsible for deciding the amount of magic power and the number of people to summon. The young man decided to leave one mana and concentrate all the rest on one person because quality was still better than quantity. Kelvin quickly began the reincarnation. However, after waiting for what felt like an eternity, the other party still hadn't appeared. Mel guessed that the person was pondering over skill choices, so it would take a bit of time. Suddenly, a thunderclap sounded, and the most anticipated character finally appeared. Kelvin introduced himself as an adventurer, which extremely excited the other party. The girl was named Rio, coincidentally the same name as someone else, making Kelvin feel exhausted. Rio said she had heard about Kelvin from the angel and still couldn't believe she had reincarnated. Kelvin said that he himself had summoned Rio here, moving the girl to tears as she threw herself into his arms. Due to the energy loss from reincarnation, Rio fainted, making Kelvin unable to believe this child was a hero. Mel told Kelvin that he had used up all his mana. so this summoning was very good, and that's why he also temporarily fainted along with Rio. Late at night, Rio suddenly woke up and recalled what had happened in the past before coming here. Rio was extremely happy because she could walk freely and enjoy the star-filled sky, which was wonderful. Suddenly Kelvin appeared, revealing that he was also fortunate to be reincarnated like Rio. However, the young man couldn't remember anything because he had traded his memories to enhance his skills. Kelvin continued to describe his feeling of being lost when he first arrived here. However, he had met valuable teammates and fought with them everywhere. By the way, Kelvin also subtly flexed that he had become the earliest A-class adventurer in Pazu. Kelvin thought Rio didn't like this place, but surprisingly, this was the girl's nightly dream. From a young age, Rio had been seriously ill, so she couldn't go outside, not even to school to meet friends. Therefore, she could only view the world through the window or in the pages of books. Rio used to feel that her life was meaningless, but thanks to Kelvin, she now had a chance to live once more. Therefore, the girl was extremely grateful to Kelvin and wanted to be his teammate. In this area, people with black hair were very rare, so she would pretend to be Kelvin's half-sister. Having been an only child before, suddenly having an older brother made the girl very happy. Rio immediately thought of countless nicknames and decided to call him Brother Ken for intimacy. However, Rio was sharing a name with a certain disagreeable old man, so he wanted the girl to change her name. So she told Kelvin to call her Rion, though it wasn't much different from her old name. The thing is, in the past, Rion often imagined herself becoming a character in stories with that name, so although Kelvin was helpless, he agreed and welcomed Rion to this fantasy world. That night, while Kelvin was sleeping, he discovered Shira lying next to him because during dinner, they had said they would take turns sleeping with him. Unexpectedly, Mel also occupied Kelvin's comfort, and she kept talking in her sleep. Additionally, there was Rion sleeping very soundly while Kelvin had to stay awake with these three people. The next day, everyone went to the Shadow Death Forest to hunt monsters, which excited Rion greatly. Kelvin also brought Ellie and her daughter there because he wanted them to raise their levels to a certain extent. Although the villa's protection had been assigned to golems, he still needed to prepare for uncertain times. Juko was worried because she had never fought monsters before, so Kelvin reassured them that they just needed to sit at the dungeon entrance. This time, Kelvin would use the experience sharing skill to distribute points to members. In other words, if they eliminated more monsters, everyone would quickly reach a level where they could fight together. So Shira invited Zedric and Clodo to compete to see who could kill more monsters. After they had gone for a while, everyone leveled up to an incredible extent. Suddenly, Nenah sensed a shadow wolf approaching. Kelvin told her not to shoot hastily because he knew Rion liked dogs and wanted to tame it. When the shadow wolf appeared, Kelvin immediately used super gravity to prevent it from moving and then proceeded to establish a contract. After that, from a ferocious wolf, it quickly became these kids' pet without anyone noticing. A moment later, Nenah informed Kelvin that Uncle Yasudo's team was also coming here. Kelvin said the group was enjoying a picnic and asked what Yasudo was doing here. Since the uncle's team had just been promoted to B-class, they had to eliminate the required number of monsters in this forest according to regulations. Yasudo found it strange that Kelvin's teammates were all beautiful women. Kelvin explained that Ellie and her daughter were servants at the villa, not exactly adventurers. When they saw Mel and Rion, the men fell into despair because Kelvin was truly blessed, while they were surrounded only by males. Soon, Shira's group had returned and said they had just seen Yasudo's group passing by. Rion told everyone they came here to hunt monsters, which made Shira suddenly feel uncomfortable. Nenah used her eagle eye to check the surroundings and discovered there were no monsters left in the forest, so Kelvin had to go apologize to Yasudo. However, he not only didn't blame him, but also praised Kelvin's group for having strength beyond standard and being very suitable for participating in the S-Class promotion exam. While bathing his pet, Kelvin kept complaining about old man Rio not informing him about it. Although this was a special exam, Rion was confident that Kelvin would pass easily. As for the Shadow Wolf, Rion had already given it a new name, Alex. After bathing, Kelvin instructed Alex to get along with Rion because from now on, they would be comrades. Coincidentally, the girl could also communicate with Alex thanks to the friendship skill. Afterward, Rion continued to practice swordsmanship with Zedric, and in her free time, she would go fishing with Shira and join the party with everyone. Time passed, making the friendship between the girl and Alex increasingly close. Even when sleeping, they were inseparable, making Kelvin and Mel find the two so adorable. That evening, preparing to go out on patrol, he saw Shira and Rion also waiting for him. It turned out she had discovered suspicious people operating shadily around the villa, so she had woken Rion up. Kelvin had let Nenah and Mel sleep, and Shira had also carefully had Zedric watch over Ellie and Juka. Thanks to Nenah's eagle eye, Kelvin knew they were only level 20 caliber, with the highest being level 26. So Kelvin decided to send Rion to deal with them to stretch her limbs and check the results of her training. Kelvin wanted Rion to subdue those who crossed the fence, so he would have the golems at the main gate retreat. Rion also strongly accepted the request, making Kelvin very proud of his little sister. After that, he left a clone of Clodo to accompany Rion to support the girl. Additionally, he also lent Rion the subordinate network and a super-enhanced sword. With all these preparations, Kelvin trusted that Rion would perform very well in this first battle. When Kristoff was captured, they had learned that Kelvin had a cooperative relationship with the hero group in Desimisu. Therefore, they wanted him to disappear tonight before becoming an obstacle to Torisen. Since coming here, Rion had always been loved and helped by everyone, so she really wanted to become the strength of the team. While Rion was fighting, Shira and Kelvin were closely observing the girl from afar. Although Rion's swordsmanship was still limited, she would certainly master S-Class swordsmanship in the future. At this rate, no one would be able to approach the villa, making Shira feel a bit disappointed for not getting to exercise. In no time, Rion had dealt with all the enemies, so Kelvin asked Clodo to clean up so he could turn them over to the Adventurers Guild. As for the leader, he would personally handle him, so he would leave Rion and Alex to Shira's care. On the other side, the man in black, seeing that his teammates didn't return, decided to retreat. Unexpectedly, Kelvin had appeared behind him, making him realize that the person who had defeated Kristoff was him. Meanwhile, Torisen was organizing a round-table conference on Kristoff's issue. The idea of kidnapping slaves was Kistan's, but he was very slippery, shifting all the blame to the incompetent and useless adventurer group. Through this incident, the three countries of Guan, Jazaji, and Desimisu had all allied with each other, so General Baristan had to take responsibility. Amid the tension between the two, Sucha spoke up, advising them to stop. Although Emperor Riel had argued that the Kristoff incident was not related to Torisen, the situation was still not very optimistic. Just one careless action right now could potentially cause war with the three countries. Kistan wanted to launch a war immediately because he believed that even if the other three countries joined forces, they wouldn't be a match for them. Sucha said that unifying the continent was their great goal, but now was not the time to do that. Azat also agreed with going to war because he had engaged in combat with Guan several times and knew their soldiers weren't elite at all. Moreover, Azat's Dragon Knight Brigade also had a secret weapon, so he wanted to test that power. Dawan also disagreed, resulting in both sides having an equal number of votes. Therefore, Sitten had proposed calling General Curly to participate in the vote, so Daba had to go call Curly there. However, the young man really hated that sick person. Daba announced that the king had just ordered Curly to the round table conference, revealing his disgust. But the king's orders couldn't be defied, so he had no choice but to agree. However, before leaving, Curly had asked Daba to judge whether he was handsome or not. Meanwhile, Kelvin's group was crossing the Seal Forest to reach the elf village in western Gon. Since Nenah was a half-elf, as soon as she arrived, she immediately felt this place was very familiar. Shira found it strange because books recorded that the elf tribe was in the western continent, not the eastern continent. Mel explained that a few decades ago, the elf tribe had migrated from the western forest, and currently, they were under Gon's protection. Earlier, Rio had informed that Torisen had always denied any connection with Black Wind. Nevertheless, they had always had small skirmishes with the neighboring country, Gon. Rio guessed that at this rate, Torisen was very likely to launch a war, so Kelvin absolutely had to be careful. If the confessions of those people were true, there was a high possibility that Kelvin would be targeted again. The old man suddenly remembered that there was a commission from the King of Gon sent to Kelvin, and that was the S-Class promotion exam. Zedric and Rion both admired Kelvin because he had received a direct notification from a country's king. It was known that one of the conditions to become S-Class was to gain the acceptance of kings from two countries. Kelvin guessed that Sabaki had acknowledged him, and somehow this news had also reached the ears of King Leon. Mel recounted that since he was 10 years old, he had set out to train and become an S-Class adventurer. Rion wondered why he didn't personally protect the village, but instead asked Kelvin. Based on recent data, Kelvin guessed that Torisen was involved with this forest. But no matter who it was, the young man wasn't afraid of anyone. Shira advised Kelvin not to be arrogant lest he be ambushed. Unexpectedly, as soon as she finished speaking, an arrow flew toward them, blocking the group's path. Kelvin immediately presented evidence proving that he had come here by order of King Leon H. Hearing this, village chief Nesat stepped forward to apologize for the disrespect. When he saw Nenah, he was extremely shocked that she was still alive. However, Nesat had just mistaken her for someone he used to know in the past. Kelvin revealed that previously Nenah had suffered the Fire Dragon King's curse and became a slave. Therefore, he wanted Nezat to tell about the person named Rumen because there might be clues about Nenah's origin. 20 years ago, they were living peacefully when suddenly the king of the dragon species came to attack. The Fire Dragon King ordered everyone to hand over the elf who had insulted him, or he would burn this forest to ashes. Until now, Nezat still didn't know why the Fire Dragon King was so furious. At that time, his rage was so terrible that he killed more than half of the villagers, and Nezat's legs had been lost since then. At that moment, only Rumen dared to face the Fire Dragon King, and begged him to direct his anger at her alone to spare the others. The Fire Dragon King told Rumen she wasn't the elf he was looking for, but if she agreed to be his wife, he would overlook the insult. To save the villagers, Rumen agreed and was taken away by the Fire Dragon King. But a few years later, they discovered Rumen's body deep in the forest. The people feared the Fire Dragon King would attack again, so they left the western continent to come here. Shira speculated that Nenah could be the child of Rumen and the Fire Dragon King, but Mel said that half-elves were only born between humans and elves. Nevertheless, Kelvin still believed that Rumen must be Nenah's mother. However, Nenah's past was no longer important because now she had beloved teammates by her side. After reminiscing about the old days, Kelvin wanted Nezat to get to the main point. According to King Leon H's commission, new species monsters had brought their subordinates to kidnap elves in the forest. Therefore, the villagers had to set up barriers to mislead directions, but the monsters still found the exact location of the village. Currently, the monsters had come here 3 times, gathering to kidnap elves. Even the soldiers sent from Gone were helpless. Everyone reassured Nezat that they would protect this village, making him very grateful. Kelvin asked Nezat's permission to renovate this village so that monsters couldn't approach the people. Nezat immediately agreed, making Shira feel sorry for the future of those monsters. That night, soldiers led the hybrid beast brigade into the forest to prepare to kidnap the villagers. They kept mocking that everyone had run away in fear, so now no one dared to show up. The strategy that Kiston had devised was initially to provide Guan with complete information, and then fight with their forces to eliminate the monsters. The soldiers wondered where Kiston had gotten that collar that could capture even his class, when suddenly some force attacked, causing them to fall one after another. The spearman immediately ordered everyone to hide behind the monsters because the enemy was attacking from afar. Meanwhile, Nenah was using a bow made by Kelvin, so she could shoot anywhere without making a sound. He had also built a wall around the village thanks to the Adamant Fortress skill. Thanks to the Fake Mist skill, when enemies stood outside, they couldn't visually confirm. The wall had been reinforced, and the water had also been enchanted by Shira with dark magic, so no enemy could infiltrate inside. After the preparations were complete, it was time for Kelvin's team to take action. While the leader was drinking tea and chatting, he received news that Team 4 had been eliminated, and the battalion commander had been captured by the enemy. He reported that the opponents weren't Guan soldiers, but some adventurer team of unknown identity. However, they were so strong that even B-class monsters couldn't win. At this point, the commander had no choice but to use his trump card to wipe out all enemies. At this moment, Mel and Rion had found their base, causing the soldier to flee in fear. The commander didn't care and still called for the giant lord to wake up. Seeing this, Mel wanted Rion and Alex to deal with that tall, dark guy. She guessed that the monster was equivalent to S-Class, but even so, Rion was still confident that she could win. Right after that, the duo of Rion and Alex approached the giant lord together. However, Rion couldn't strike because her sword broke when it just touched his skin. Rion was facing quite a few disadvantages, but to be acknowledged by Mel, the girl didn't want to fall at this moment. Rion asked Clodo to transform into a new weapon, and together with Alex, they combined 3 swords to confront the giant warrior. With the sword crafted by Kelvin, along with the fake holy sword and Alex's pack sword, Rion deployed the Wolf-Human Unity 3-sword style technique, successfully defeating their giant lord. The commander wasn't resigned and forced the giant lord to transform, revealing its true form. Nenah was very worried about Rion, but Kelvin remained calm because he believed the girl would definitely succeed. Facing the ferocious monster, Rion showed no fear. She quickly climbed onto its body and once again used the lightning blade to defeat this monster. After finishing, Rion immediately came to hug Mel and received a shower of praise from her. Kelvin was proud of Rion because in such a short time, she had progressed so much. When suddenly someone launched a surprise attack, but Kelvin quickly blocked it. As soon as he saw the opponent, Kelvin exploded with extreme excitement because he could tell this guy was no ordinary person. For a womanizer like Curly, he had developed a desire for Nenah from the first sight, so he immediately used the enchantment skill, but Kelvin recognized it and stopped it in time. What's more, he didn't forget to threaten and warn that bastard not to dare touch his woman. Kelvin took the opportunity to use his appraisal eye on Curly's skills and learned that he was also a reincarnated person. Curly's concealment skill was a class, but was peaked at, so he suspected that Kelvin was also a reincarnated person like him. Kelvin told Nenah to move to the protective wall because he would dismiss the watchtower right now. Curly was reluctant to leave, making Kelvin irritated enough to blow him away in an instant. After dismissing the watchtower, he quickly created 4 Auspidon spears and shot them straight at Curly. Nevertheless, he still stopped them in time and mocked Kelvin for being just an extra who dared to look down on the main character. Kelvin continued to use the spears to attack, but Curly remained calm, proudly claiming that his spiral shield was invincible. Kelvin again displayed his savage smile and was almost ambushed from behind. While counterattacking, Kelvin realized that even his teammates had been enchanted by this bastard. But Curly shamelessly claimed that it was their honor to serve someone as super handsome as him. While Curly was still boasting, his proud shield was unexpectedly broken by Nenah. Kelvin also created 4 golems with souls that not only acted independently, but could also use skills. Seeing this, Curly sent the pretty girls to confront Kelvin's golems. Before the battle, Kelvin instructed them not to take the lives of the girls because he would dispel the enchantment afterward. Both sides had balanced numbers, so from now on, Kelvin would be Curly's opponent. After that came a speed battle between the 2 young men, with neither willing to lose. Curly highly evaluated Kelvin and allowed him to become his loyal servant. Kelvin immediately refused this offer, making Curly furious enough to attack him. Kelvin reminded Curly that he was causing his teammates to be injured, but he didn't care because there were many people to replace them. Curly didn't think Kelvin would value his teammates' lives so much. For Curly, what happened to these people didn't matter because this was a free world not bound by any rules. Curly thought Kelvin wasn't much better because he was also a battle maniac. Kelvin admitted that he was stimulated by powerful things, but he wasn't self-centered and didn't have a disgusting personality like a certain blonde. After saying that, both of them rushed into a life or death battle, and the result was that Curly went berserk because his priceless face had been injured. So the savage man threatened to make Kelvin pay with his S-Class magic. Curly's storm shield was indeed extremely powerful and terrifying to the point that Kelvin had to admire it. He asked Clodo to take out the S-Class Disaster Dark Staff to prepare to teach Curly fear. Although the Death Scythe he mentioned was still incomplete, Kelvin was determined to make Curly taste it and pay for what he had done. Kelvin was a bit disappointed that this move had missed, so he could only take away 2 legs of that bastard. But at this moment, Kiston suddenly appeared and carried him away. Kiston introduced himself as the general of the Beast Brigade and also the one who planned this attack. Kelvin demanded Kiston to hand over Curly, but he refused because this guy still had exploitation value. The teleportation just now wasn't a normal summoning magic, so Kelvin guessed this monster possessed very interesting skills. Kiston knew Kelvin wasn't a simple opponent, so he quickly retreated and arranged to meet him on a not-too-distant day. Everyone immediately asked about Kelvin's condition and praised his magic as wonderful. The young man apologized for letting the enemy escape and returned to the village with Clodo. Afterward, Nenah reported to Nizat that Torisen's S-Class monster and General Curly had been defeated. So Nizat immediately ordered everyone to open a grand feast to celebrate the victory. Zedric wondered about Kelvin calling Nenah his woman, making her extremely embarrassed. Just at this moment, Kelvin returned, almost embarrassing Nenah to death. Meanwhile, the trio of Shira, Mel, and Rion were competing to see who would reach the finish line first to receive Kelvin's praise. All 3 were equally matched, but in the final seconds, Rion accelerated to finish first. Shira didn't expect to lose to a kid, but she was happy to congratulate Rion for completing the mission well. Even Kelvin praised and was proud of Rion, making the girl extremely satisfied. On the other side, Curly had regained consciousness and had his legs restored by Kiston to carry out a dark conspiracy. Because he knew Curly was a reincarnated person, Kiston wanted to use Curly as an experimental subject, specifically to have him receive as many as 1 in 344 cursed weapons at once. Kiston would have someone use recovery magic on Curly, so he wouldn't die but would still suffer physical pain. That night, while everyone was happily enjoying the wine party, Kelvin went up the mountain to enjoy the scenery alone. Nenah had found Kelvin and asked what the master was pondering. She was just feeling grateful for meeting everyone, so she would definitely use this power to protect everyone because he didn't want to have regrets. Suddenly, Kelvin had a feeling that he had lost something important, but he quickly calmed down. Nenah showed Kelvin her mother's treasure and felt very lucky to have come here. Nenah asked Kelvin to help her wear it and then requested him to allow her to serve him forever. The two were sharing their youthful thoughts when everyone unexpectedly came to find Kelvin. Suddenly, a little girl ran up to thank Kelvin for protecting the village. The young man completely didn't recognize that she was Leon H., the Beast King of Guan. However, this was just a fake body so she could monitor Kelvin's exam. Leon H praised Kelvin for doing very well and fully acknowledged his talent. Leon H announced that 4 days later, there would be an S-Class Adventurer promotion ceremony, so Kelvin would have mock battles with other S-Class seniors. Kelvin listened with excitement, making Leon H laugh at his confidence. Everyone knew Kelvin was a super battle maniac, so they could only smile wryly. After everything, the group continued to move forward to meet stronger opponents.